and I'm very pleased today to have as my guest, Gib Bulloch. Gib Bulloch is born and bred on the small Scottish island of Bute off the west coast of Scotland. He spent much of his career living and working in over 100 countries around the world. He now resides in Geneva and holds dual British and Swiss nationalities. Gib is the founder of the award-winning corporate social enterprise Accenture Development Partnerships, which recently celebrated its 20th anniversary. This innovative business model broke new ground in the consulting world, and Gibb was named UK Management Consultant of the Year. In recognition of the work he and his team, he left Accenture in 2016 to write his first book, The Intrapreneur: Confessions of a Corporate Insurgent. Welcome, leaders. In a world constantly evolving, true leaders need to come from a place of resilience, with vision, and wanting to embrace change, which is all around us. I'm Dr. Stephen Sideroff, and this is Quantum Leadership Podcast, where we look at the principles that connect the mind, body, spirit, and organizational success. Welcome, my friend, Gib. Welcome to our podcast.
Delighted to be here, Stephen, and thank you for the warm introduction. Thank you.
You're welcome. And let's begin by talking about your personal journey to leadership. I know there are a number of pivotal moments in that journey. I'd like you to share that with the audience and the lessons learned.
And lessons learned, crumbs. Well, as you say, I was born and bred on a small Scottish island. If people haven't worked it out already from my accent, I am Scottish, so I will be speaking as clearly as possible. Otherwise, you're going to have to put subtitles in this and a transcript into the podcast. So I will speak as clearly as I possibly can, but I retain this accent without an apology, despite having worked in the countries and lived in the country you talked about. But my heart, despite having traveled around, my heart remains, even to this day, on this beautiful island on the west coast of Scotland. But when I got to 18, like most people, I went to study. I went to try and seek my fame and fortune, as they say. And again, like many people in the early 90s, got drawn to the magnetic pool of London, the bright lights, the fast lane, and all the trappings of success that we were meant to be chasing. And I guess I did tick many of these boxes. I got the sports car. I got the jet set lifestyle, working as a management consultant. I'm not sure whether management consultant of the year is a thing I would sort of broadcast too much, given they're not the most popular people in the world. It's like calling yourself lawyer of the year or something like that. But over my career there, I enjoyed what I was doing. I worked hard. Then, you talk about the pivotal moments. People think that the big set piece events in your life are when things really change, getting married or death of a parent, birth of a child. And of course, these are big things. But for me, it's also the small, seemingly insignificant cubic centimeters of chance, as it's once been called, where you're sort of drawn to an adventure, drawn to do something different. And I remember a very pivotal moment. My epiphany was not on the road to Damascus. It was actually on the underground metro in London. I was on my way to a client site. It was March 1999. I was reading the Financial Times, and that's when this cubic centimeter of chance hit me. I was enjoying my job. I was earning a lot of money. I had the gold card and the luggage. All of these things that I'd wanted, I had, but there was something missing. And then I read this article, and it was about the need for volunteers, business volunteers with real business experience, to work in developing countries. And it was a partnership between a charity and business. They wanted businesses to partner, give them their leaders, and they would give them back better. That was the theory. We would send people away for 12 months at a time, to a challenging environment. They would borrow the leaders and then send them back. And I was with Accenture, and this for me was the thing I'd been. This was the missing link for me. I couldn't quite have articulated it to you at the time, but within a year, I found myself working as a volunteer, if you will, in Northern Macedonia, and that changed my life. And I'll pause on there, but that was really the first big pivot in my life.
So, Gibb, that's a huge shift for you. What motivated you you saw this ad, what motivated you to jump on it, something very, very different than what you were doing? Because it was an important change in your path.
I didn't know it at the time, but it was, it was just an ordinary day, and I was reading this article. It wasn't really an advert; it was an op-ed of some kind. But it would have an extraordinary impact on my life. I had no idea where it would take me at the time. But as I said, I was feeling a bit empty. I was ticking these boxes and these KPIs of so-called success and what's meant to make us happy. But I wasn't feeling happy and fulfilled. The pay rises were meaning less and less. I was missing meaning, you know, and that was the real thing. You know, I had loads of money, but I lacked the meaning. And then this was presented on a plate in front of me. And sometimes, I don't know whether I'm sure you have found this yourself, Stephen, but there's sometimes a feeling where you can't not do something. It's an innate impulse. It might be scary. It might be uncertain. It might be ridiculous it was ridiculous to many of my peers and colleagues. There's me sitting with what everyone thought was the perfect life, driving a Porsche and living in a nice apartment and traveling around business class. And I wanted to go to a developing country on less than, 5% of my normal salary. They gave me a stipend and work all the hours that God sends. I must have been nuts. And maybe, as we'll come to later on, maybe the people that thought I was nuts were right, but it was something I couldn't not do.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you were very much aware of this feeling of emptiness that you described, that the money, the car, the apartment wasn't giving you, which we usually think about in terms of having meaning and purpose in your life. And so I'm hearing that was what was calling to you.
You know, as someone once said, you can have a career with success, but what about a career with significance? I didn't have the significance, not to me anyway. And I think it comes down to, are you doing something for yourself? I was enriching already wealthy, successful organizations, improving share prices, reducing costs, improving efficiency of these large corporations. I wasn't doing it. It was losing its appeal. And until I went to actually transform the lives in this very poor country, I ended up in Northern Macedonia, as it's now called, just after the Kosovo War, just after there had been a really significant war in Kosovo. And I started seeing firsthand then how my business skills, how my MBA could be applied to develop business plans for small businesses, help train. It was the early stages at this time. This is 1999 in fact, I went there in 2000 till 2001. And that was the early stages of e-business, and actually bringing that to life in a poor country and training and using these skills. I was on a 97% salary reduction, never more motivated in my life. That's the irony.
That's beautiful. It fits with one of my pillars of resilience, the third one, which is relationship with something greater than yourself, which could be spirituality, meaning and purpose in life, something that connects you to the larger community. So you were tapping into that aspect of resilience. Let's continue. And how did you translate that experience into the next step of your leadership journey?
I wouldn't have called it at the time. I didn't realize it was maybe a deeper, more connected, greater than self thing. It was just something, again, that I couldn't do. And similarly, after spending a year there, I'd expected to go volunteer, pat myself on the back and say, well done, I've given back. Now let's go and buy a new Porsche, get a promotion, make partner, and carry on that bandwagon. But it was like a drug. If purpose was a drug, I'd become an addict, right? I'd got this addiction for, using my core skills for meaning. And I also was lying in these, there wasn't much to do in the evenings in Northern Macedonia. You could pay pool, have a beer, or I was learning Macedonian and trying to think about how much more could I get done if I had my normal team of consultants, if I had the backing of the mothership, if you will. Why is it that countries like Northern Macedonia and all of sub-Saharan Africa and most of the developing world is shortchanged when it comes to business skills and expertise and technology expertise? Could I turn the business model of Accenture somewhat on its head? Could I create a sustainable, scalable business within the business? So that was the idea that was hatched, that then became Accenture Development Partnerships. And it was hatched actually, the idea was germinating. And then as I sat in a cafe in Macedonia waiting to go on the plane home, rather than writing a business plan or anything, I just wrote a fake press article. I wrote vision the future, and this is something that might be a tip for some of your listeners. 50 pages of PowerPoint is not going to win anyone over. Big spreadsheet can come later. 2 pages of the future and writing a story about how in Davos our chairman of Accenture was going to launch a non-profit arm to a great fanfare, and how the company would do very well. So I set the press article 2 years into the future, and long story short, it found its way to the chairman, and I got invited for breakfast to explain what on earth I was talking about, and things moved from there.
How did you convince him? What do you think was the key that you convinced the chairman to go for your idea?
It's quite ironic as I think back, because I almost slept in my alarm, didn't go off this morning, and I almost missed this. I mean, I didn't know even the chairman. I'd been given this opportunity. My boss's boss had forwarded this article, and there with this opportunity to meet the chairman, I almost slept in. So I got across London. What normally takes an hour, I did in 35 minutes. Yeah.
Good thing you had a Porsche.
Sweating, a few minutes late. I certainly wasn't in the car. But what he would say, his name's Sir Vernon Ellis, a fabulous leader that we can talk about. And there's my first name. He was very senior in the firm, but he would say, normally I have people coming to me, knocking on my door, they're complaining about their salaries not high enough. They want a promotion. You said, when you were saying through your, the story in this article, when you were saying that you actually wanted to cut your salary voluntarily, and that you felt that there was a large number of employees that wanted to do that, he said, you got my attention then. That's what he would say. I think the fact I gave him a knighthood, a sir, fictitiously, he now has a knighthood from the king, but I think that caught his attention as well. Maybe pulled in the ego a little bit.
So you told in those 2 pages a really good story with a really good with a really good vision of what's possible, and that's what caught their attention.
Yeah, and I am a great believer in this. I was passionate about what I was wanting to say. And back to my point, I think if you can summarize your vision in a story, get people to see what you see, get people to understand the business case. I wasn't appealing to the heartstrings. I was appealing to his business instincts. I was saying there's an opportunity to create a business here and reinvent what was then pro bono consulting, where most consultancies would give away some free time when they had some spare people. They weren't probably the best people. They would give them away to charities for a couple of weeks. I'm saying, no, there's an opportunity to really turn that on its head, to take people. They will work on typically half their salary voluntarily. We will not make profit. Accenture wouldn't make profit, but it would cover its costs, because the clients, which would be the international NGOs, the Red Cross, the Save the Children's, the UNICEF's, all of these organizations that weren't our clients and were operating in countries where we couldn't have an impact, we could actually go there. We could go to where there was a great need for our services, but there wasn't a business model to go there. That was what was innovative about it. And the rationale was not do this because it's a morally the right thing to do this. Do this because it will attract and retain the leaders you will require to grow your business. And that was borne out, actually. We were able to attract the best talent, retain the best talent, and develop them through a cross-cultural international experience that money couldn't buy.
That's beautiful. And was it smooth sailing from there, or tell me some of the obstacles that you overcame and how you did that? And really, what do you think it was about you in particular that was able to achieve something that was really so fantastical when you look at it on the surface?
Oh, you've been very kind. Was it smooth sailing? Absolutely not. So if you can see these wrinkles, I know you're into longevity, but I think we were really flying in the face of where the business, where the market forces and conventional wisdom were taking businesses. Accenture was focused on commercial markets, big clients, developed countries, et cetera, high fees. We were 180 degrees. We were going into the poorest countries where there wasn't a market for our services. And we were working a bit under the radar.
And this was your proposal?
The proposal became a feasibility study. I asked from the press article, what do you want? Said the chairman. And I said, I want 3 months and 6 people, and I'm going to do a feasibility study. And then we did a pilot. And then the pilot became a launch when there was only 2 or 3 of us doing this work. And the kind of work we were doing, just to bring it to life, was, we don't know anything about international development. We were management consultants. We didn't know about health and education systems. We did know about logistics and supply chain, for example. So we could help get vaccines where they needed to go, or medicines. We could help train nurses using e-learning technology. We would be able to do a lot of the back office cost efficiency work. So there's a lot that we could actually do by using our core skills and applying them in a different context for a different impact. And we are delighted to say, from a standing start, this thing grew. It captured the imagination of not just the leadership who supported this. By and large, we can talk about some of the challenges in a second, but the employees that were attracted to it like a lightning rod. We were putting on a plate, unbelievable, even though it was half the salary. Here's a statistic that I love. At one point, we had 50,000 people of Accenture queuing up to go on this program for 6 months on half their salary and work on the other side of the world, because it's this purpose premium. It's this idea that our top performers were looking for maybe a new challenge, something different, wanting to give back, wanting to see how their skills could be impacting the lives of others. And that it's not unique, I don't think, to Accenture. I think there is this latent desire in most large organizations and most individuals to do something for others, to do something, be involved in something that's bigger than themselves. And we tapped into that. And, after 10 years, we, delivered over $250 million services. When ADP is still going, 1,700 people worked on programs last year alone. I don't know how many over 21 years, but it's probably delivered over $1 billion worth of services in 90 countries around the world. And I'm not saying that this was my thing alone. I was able to lead a team of I was able to attract and choose the best leaders from around the whole organization or whatever Accenture worked. So I was just really I was at the top of the pile, I suppose, but it was the team who really grew this. And since I've left Accenture, we've grown it to new heights, which is fantastic to watch.
But let's talk for a moment. I hear that it wasn't only you, but you attracted the team and you directed the team. You played some instrumental parts here. Can you share a little about how you did that and the importance of leadership and how you were able to really grow this organization, which was under your leadership.
It's very kind. I'm not overburdened with false modesty. So I guess I did play a role. I do think a large part of it.
You're making it hard for me to get you to acknowledge
these things out. It was all my thing. It was all because of me. I think a huge part of it was that I struck a chord with the idea. The idea, as I say, was the lightning rod that it just seemed to tap a nerve. Despite the fact that people had to give up some salary, that didn't seem to matter. So that was a huge part of it. And yes, okay, the role I played, I guess what people said in feedback, and we did a lot of these things, and why people came to join, was that it was groundbreaking. It was people like an optimist. Leaders don't follow, or people don't like to follow pessimists, in my view. Mm-hmm. They want to follow an optimist who has a vision for making the world maybe a better place. And then, of course, we had a lot of autonomy. I gave people a lot of autonomy as well. So each, when I started off, we were three of us. I was making the coffee. I was doing the accounts. I had to do everything. And as the thing grew, my responsibilities got up. And the person below me was doing what I was doing last year, and so on and so forth. So people were able to grow their careers. People were able to take more responsibility, had a lot of autonomy. And, so we were working with a common goal.
Just on that one piece, giving people under you autonomy. A lot of leaders have difficulty doing that. And a lot of leaders don't do it right. So how can you say a little bit about that process?
Some of it was just a necessity. So this is way before COVID and lockdown, that people were working from home, and there's all this current talk about, do you work under the boss's nose and working from home or in the office? We were a leadership team dispersed across many different countries. I had leaders in India. I had a group in New York, a group in Washington, a group in South Africa. I was in London, then subsequently Geneva, where I am now. We were in different time zones. I could not micromanage people. We had to manage by outcomes and outputs. I was given a lot of responsibility from the leaders like Sir Vernon and many other leaders. They gave me this bit. They said, okay, here, we'll support you, and we can talk about some of the things that they did that were right. And I can come back to that. They gave me the air cover. They gave me the support. And I then passed that on and cascaded that to others and said, look, you're responsible. You're in South Africa. You're in whichever country. You're responsible for your own P&L. I'm responsible for a P&L. Because I did have a profit and loss to run. The fact was, it was trying not to make profit and trying not to make loss. So we were actually a not-for-loss group as well as a not-for-profit arm. It was a cost-neutral venture. So it wasn't just, a philanthropy or anything.
Right. What were some of your obstacles or some of the mistakes that you might have made in this process that you learned from?
We sure made plenty of mistakes, and we had a lot of successes as well. I think you probably learn more from the mistakes, but I guess an overdone strength is a weakness, as the saying goes. I think a strength of mine is maybe being stubborn and not taking no for an answer, and maybe I was too stubborn sometimes, but and that would sometimes attract attention from leadership. I talk about and coined the phrase, the corporate immune system, which is a sort of analogy of the antibodies and the resistance to change that a large organization, a large business, which is set up to make profit, maximize profit, it tries to snuff out anything that's not doing that. It can be culture, it can be performance management processes, it can be leaders that want to micromanage. But we became a bit of a victim of our own success. Our head was above the parapet. When we were very small, we could get policies wouldn't necessarily be applied to us too strictly. Ignored, and I guess maybe some of us. I was wheeling and dealing and asking for favors. When we became sizable, when we made a very small dent in the actual numbers, and we became a risk in some ways as well, because when you get people in countries that are, let's say very dangerous maybe for employees, we started to get attention, not all of it wanted. And maybe I wasn't the biggest diplomat ever, but I started to get, this is maybe after 10 years in, as we were really well established, I started to get leaders coming in who maybe didn't know enough about what we were about. It's ironic, actually. I'd had to win some of the arguments in the early stages about why we would do this, what the business case is, what the business rationale was. Then a CEO would move on and then get another one. And you have to win the same arguments over and over again. And when someone comes in without a lot of time and says, why are we working in Rwanda? Why are we working in this? Why are our people not making profit? It became difficult. And well, I started getting under a lot of pressure, as you know.
Can you speak about how you handled that pressure? The pressure to make money, or?
It wasn't to make. I was never, and it was explicit that we weren't going to make money, but we weren't also going to lose money. It was this pressure around the bureaucracy of a multi-billion-dollar organization, the rules, the controls that make big organizations successful and able to scale. If you apply these things to what was essentially a startup, a social enterprise within the company, then it's suffocating. And I was attracting that. The buck stopped with me. So when things were going well, and they did, I get overdue credit for all the successes. There's thousands of people were involved, and you're interviewing me to talk about this success. When the proverbial, hits the fan, I was getting a disproportionate amount of the responsibility or the blame.
Can you give an example of that?
I can name drop here a little bit in terms of leaders, but we were doing a bit of work right as at the beginning in Myanmar when it was just opening up. Aung San Suu Kyi at that time wasn't in prison, and I had a meeting with the Tony Blair Foundation, and Tony Blair and his group had asked us to come in and help build the capacity, train the government and support them as they started to pivot towards market economy and try and lift that country out of poverty. At the time, it was, I think, 5% had electricity and 8% had a mobile phone. And I had people there, but I had bypassed some of the rules to go there. I knew that this was important for us. I was too tempted by the opportunity to work at the heart of this emerging government, right at the presidential level, with Tony Blair and his foundation opening doors. So I didn't cover all the months of bureaucracy and form filling, and I would have got no for an answer. And then when a bomb went off in the capital, Rangoon, as we would say, Yangon, and then they found out that we had a couple of people working in the capital, then the leadership weren't aware. So I had a bit of explaining to do. It was when you're flying by the seat of the pants, when you're being an entrepreneur or an intrapreneur in a big organization, you take risks. You beg forgiveness rather than ask permission. So the heat was on, and that's when then things started to go a little bit, got a bit tougher, I would say.
Mm-hmm. So on a personal level, how did you handle that tough situation? What was going on? What was going on within?
Not very well. Not very well, as you may come to in terms of the burnout or whatever I had.
But this was before that, right?
This was before that. I really don't think I handled it very well.
So Gib, I'm asking you because I think these are not uncommon experiences. And so it may have led to your burnout and may have resulted in you learning lessons maybe after the fact, but those are important lessons anyway.
Oh, I learned that lessons after the fact. No, I started taking, I was working flat out, traveling a lot. We were flying economy class because we were the non-profit arm. I had my own P&L, so I would be traveling to these far off places overnight, not getting you talk a lot about sleep in your work.
Right.
I was probably ignoring 8 or 9 of the pillars of resilience that you talked about, and just stubbornly thinking I was bulletproof and that I could go on and I could carry on, or that I was maybe even outside of the rules of the game, because I didn't agree with some of the rules, and some of that. I mean, you have to challenge the rules, and what was it? The Dalai Lama said you need to know the rules in order to know how to break them. So I knew when I was breaking the rules, but the pressure that I was under, retrospectively, I don't think I looked after myself and handled myself as I would hope I would do now, with hindsight, with the benefit of hindsight.
Right. So the notion of balance was not there when you were as stubborn and pushing through as you did.
Absolutely not. When I look back at my diary, there was no gaps in between the meetings. It was, I just thought busyness was equated busyness to productivity, and success, and I was so passionate about what we were doing, I just stopped looking after myself. I mean, it seems foolish now, but I'm sure there's plenty of people. I know there are plenty of people who are in exactly this situation at the moment. They're just working harder and harder, longer and longer hours, burning themselves out. And, you don't see it when you're in it at the time.
Yeah. So let's talk about leading disruptive change, because you talk about that and the importance of handling, being comfortable with leading change. Could you say a little bit about that?
I've given you the story for what I was doing. I wasn't, given the job. I guess created a job and created this business, led the team that created a business. But then I got labeled an intrapreneur. So the idea of being an entrepreneur inside a large organization. And this is a movement that has really grown in significance in recent years. I could have left when I came back from Macedonia, tried to start up my own business and do something on the side. It was a deliberate choice to try to lead disruptive change, as you put it, from the inside. I wanted to challenge the system from inside the system. I felt that a small change in a huge super tanker like Accenture, I mean, we're talking 700,000 or 800,000 people now. You pivot a super tanker 1 degree left or 1 degree right, the impact downstream is massive. And so I was in the system as an intrapreneur. And there is, I'd love to talk about the idea that there are intrapreneurs and employee activists working inside these organizations at all levels within the organization, driving and trying to drive change. And it is difficult, and it has its collateral damage, as we'll probably get to, in terms of burnout and things like that.
I would assume that from what you're saying, your perspective is that transformative leadership would be a leader who recognizes the value of these intrapreneurs, recognizes the value, and perhaps supports pulling the best out of their employees, so that the creativity isn't only from the top down, but can be from the bottom up.
Totally. So ultimately, you need both. I was fortunate enough to have leaders like Sir Bernard Ellis and Mark Spellman and Mark Ford. These are names that don't mean anything to many people, although they've been senior business leaders, and people who are into business will maybe have heard these names. But these were leaders at the time in the company who were able to give me space, were able to give me air cover. So in the early days, that's what I needed was air cover, so that we didn't get too squashed before we could get up and standing. And after a few years, it was more lifting up and celebrating success. So yes, there is a top-down, bottom-up thing. It is difficult for employees to do it alone. But I think Forbes did a survey recently that said that 70% of the most innovative transformations in business in recent years have come from employees, have been driven by employees, not necessarily within the R&D department with a few people on the side doing the R&D. These are people who have an idea and are prepared to follow through their idea, their dream, and have the leadership then that supports them. A great example of this, I think, is Novartis, for example. I love the fact that their chief executive, Vas Narasimhan, he talks about unbossing the company. He talks about taking, it's really about empowerment and allowing this energy, this innate creativity and this desire for purpose to bubble up from within. So the boss's role is to empower and then get out of the way, ideally.
Yes. And when we think about quantum leadership and quantum effect, it gets magnified when you empower all of the different nodes within a system. And it's interesting. One of my other interviews was with Honorable Ralph Gonsalves, the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, who he referred to it as his X factor, as one of his leadership skills, which is to pull out the best out of people, even stuff in them that they were not even aware that they had. And I think it simply magnifies the power of leadership.
Totally. I love that X factor thing. And certainly what I found with our teams was that when we were able to give people roles that were maybe a couple of levels more senior than they would have been getting in the large commercial clients. So they would be working at the C-suite level, even when they were a relatively junior. And people went up, even the strong performers went up a couple of gears in terms of the performance when they were empowered, when they were passionate. And so that was something that was really rewarding for me, was to watch just how much people could get done, surprising themselves with what they were, the responsibility they were able to take on, and the innovation and creativity they were able to bring to these things.
Yeah, that's a great model of stretching a person. That's great. So let's move on to your, the burnout that occurred. If you want to share a little bit about that and how that came about.
I wrote a book, as you know, as you mentioned in your introduction about this, and we can maybe talk about what the book's about. It wasn't something I'd planned to do. It was the experience, I suppose, that brought it about. But I still don't know whether it was a breakdown, burnout that I had, or something more of a breakthrough. It was certainly a crisis. It was certainly a big pivot. I've explained just how hard I was working, not looking after myself, all the hours. I was at an event in India, a retreat. It was the first time I went away to do yoga and retreat. And I was exposed to some sort of, some of the different practices there, but I came back with a fever. The fever turned into a manic episode. I wasn't sleeping. I'm giving you the very abridged version. There's more in the book. But I ended up spending 5 days and nights in a psychiatric hospital in Glasgow, which was, to say it was a wake-up call would be an understatement. I had always considered myself, as I say, bulletproof. I was happy. I was loving my work. I came from a good family. Mental health issues were for other people. People that didn't like their job, people that were overworked, and I hadn't seen it coming. And when that happens to you, you have to, it hasn't maybe happened to you, but statistically, 1 in 4 people listening to this will have had some experience of mental health. You know this far better than I do.
Yeah. How did you turn that into a positive?
As they say, never let a good crisis go to waste. I stepped out of the role. The company was very good and gave me space and gave me time off. And I went away and I started writing, partly for cathartic reasons. But I also felt there was a story to tell. That here's the irony that I'd been told for certainly the early years of what I was doing, that I was crazy. Who would work on the other side of the world and have salary? You're crazy to think people will have their salary. You're crazy to think that Accenture would work on a non-profit basis. You're crazy to think that Save the Children will cut a check to Accenture. And then I end up in a hospital. Had these people been proven right? Or I was, again, stubborn enough to say it wasn't actually me that went crazy. It's the system that I was working within that's crazy. And so the book emerged from this, partly to break taboos around mental health. And I wanted to talk and out myself about the experience I'd had and take away any shame and guilt around this. But it was more around trying to hold a mirror up to the system that I'd been working in, the hours that I'd been working, and challenge really the role that business is having in society and where business are going. So that's really what the book's about, is telling this story, but it's about the craziness of the system as opposed to the craziness of the individual. I'm not, please don't, well, your listeners don't think that mental health and craziness, and I'm not saying this in a pejorative way, but I'm trying to turn this into the idea that the system looks a bit crazy from the inside of one of these places.
And you talk about how that's one of your biggest frustrations, is how businesses treat the symptoms and not the cause, and not looking at the toxic workplace environment, long hours, culture, and things like this.
I think in some ways it's a bit like, you and I are old enough to know of the canaries that they used to put down coal mines when they were wanting to know if the atmosphere had become toxic. The poor canary and the perch would fall over. It was the first to feel it, and people would get out of the coal mine. Certainly in the UK, that's what they did. And that's an early warning system. And I think that at the moment, what we're trying to do in business is create more resilient canaries. It's crazy. We're doing these individual responses rather than looking at the underlying system, the way people are working, how they're working, where they're working, and why they're working. That's where leadership, to my mind, needs to start to focus and just see that there is a pandemic, a hidden pandemic of mental health, breakdowns, burnouts, absenteeism, presenteeism. It's endemic and it's costing business a fortune. And the leaders that tap into that and realize that they are missing a trick, that they are not treating this at the macro level, will be successful.
Yeah. So a lot of times when I go into corporations, organizations, it's not spoken, but there's this culture where it's either your health or productivity, and the organizations don't recognize there's a way for the two to come together. In fact, I've been in corporations where I will see the leaders taking good care of themselves, but the people under them, when it comes to taking the time for an important course or training, will say, "Oh, this emergency came up. I can't do it," or "I have to do this. This is too urgent for me to break away." And this frequently is the culture of most organizations, even though we have plenty of good examples of where health and productivity go together.
Well, totally. I don't know whether you read the book. I loved reading the recent book by Cal Newport, which is called Slow Productivity, which is exactly to this point. And he's basically, the hypothesis is that we've got it wrong when it comes to how we measure productivity of knowledge workers. We think it's correlated to hours worked or keystrokes on the computer or something. And it actually is the opposite. It is, most of the big achievements, he argues, in recent years and decades and even centuries, have been done by people who, on a day-by-day, hour-by-hour basis, are not that busy. They are, impactful when they're on, and they're not busy fools. So I think but it is absolutely possible to do that.
Yeah. So let's talk about what makes a good leader and the future of business leadership. How would you frame that conversation?
I'm struggling to find great role model examples out there in the leadership of corporations at the moment, which is disappointing. I feel great leaders are people who have the courage of their convictions, that their values are deep and don't change with the changing political winds, dare I say, that they are prepared to be brave and stand up for their people, for what they believe in. And I think that at the moment, we've got a lot of business operators, as opposed to leaders. We've got COOs masquerading as CEOs, people who are able to maintain the status quo, to make, yes, the business models more efficient, cut out costs. To my mind, that's not leading, that's operating. Where's the vision? Vision, I think, is so important. And what I think we need at the moment is a very different kind of leader. You would argue probably a quantum leader. It can't come soon enough, but we cannot. I've come to the conclusion that perhaps the way we've been operating in the past, the badness of the system that I talk about in the book, let's not keep propping up that old system with incremental change. I think we need people that can jump the S-curve, that can imagine a new future of business, a new future of the role of business in society, and build the new and have the vision to create that intrapreneurially, entrepreneurially, whatever that may be. And it's unfortunately few and far between at the moment in terms of examples.
Yeah. So we're talking about going back to the concept of the immune system of an organization. I can also think of it as the organization's culture, in a sense.
Yep.
And we're talking about good leadership, recognizing that the old world is dying, the old world that we're dealing with a lot of greater complexity than before. And so we need leaders, as you say, that have the vision to see beyond their culture, beyond their immune system, so that they can help the organization break out of existing patterns.
I'm not sure necessarily I'd say that the immune system is exactly analogous to culture. I could see there being, in fact, I would say that Accenture had quite an entrepreneurial culture. It gave me, I was empowered and I could do a lot of things. But there is this inertia, I think, in most systems, an inertia to change, which I describe as this antibodies that are trying to snuff out pockets of change and islands of change. I think business leaders of today have been programmed through their MBAs, and all the Ivy League business schools, etc., as to the linear 1 + 1 always equals 2 form of business. They've been programmed as to how this works. And I think there's going to have to be a degree of unlearning in this. It's not just going to be, yes, you could call it maybe culture change, but it's a paradigm change more than a culture change about how things could work. It might not. It might be 1 + 1 = 11 in this new world. And I don't know what the new world is that we're creating. I talked before a bit about, I've written before in the past about a fourth sector emerging that's some of the DNA of the private sector, of the non-profit sector, social enterprises, even government, and creates the new business models, new entities that are driven by purpose more than profit, and that I think would attract the talent or the new form of leaders at all levels in the organization that will help to grow these organizations. And perhaps we will see these old structures starting to crumble and reform in new ways, driven by these new quantum leaders or new visionary leaders who can think past the way they were programmed and think to what it could be. What are the new rules of the game? Not just implement their MBA policies.
Yeah, what I'm hearing is a leader who could be nimble and flexible. So if things are changing on a dime and you don't know what the next change is, and because change is growing exponentially, that the leader who is able to take a not only a picture of what's going on now, but the process of change, the process of growth, and has some vision of where that's going to, is going to be have the best results as a leader.
I think it's agility and creativity are going to be so key, Stephen. I mean, in the past business cycles of quarter by quarter or year by year or 5-year plans, that's for the birds. That's gone. We're seeing already even in the last few months, how, with whether it's the tariff wars that are going on, some of the other changes that are happening, businesses are having to move out of markets, change on a dime, rethink their products, rethink their cost bases, rethink their customers. So you can't have the old models and apply them in this. It's going to need people who can completely think out of the box and think in new and different ways, and not be driven by the rules of the past and the rules of the game, but maybe got them to the level that they are and given them the success. It's really hard to do when you've had a career that's super successful and gets you to the top, to actually then let go of some of these things that are probably going to constrain you. And that's where I come back to the fact that leadership, you may find it's the 30-somethings who or even 20-somethings who are exhibiting some of these attributes within the organization that you're in. How can you tap into? My hope is that the future of business is going to be about solving social and environmental challenges at scale. It's about tapping into the innate human ingenuity in employee workforces, and tapping into that and scaling it. So how do you do that as a leader? What is your role going to be? And it's allowing leadership to come from the bottom up as well. I think it was Nelson Mandela said, you can lead from the front, but you can also lead from behind and make others think they're in front.
Well said. Well said. So when we think of quantum effect and we think about the observer effect, where the observer impacts perhaps unintentionally what's being observed, it gives a lot greater power to anybody engaged in producing an effect, because their intention, their belief, their vision plays a role in that process. And the other part of is entanglement, the notion of entanglement. And to me, all of these point to the importance of relationship, and how the more effective the relationships in an organization, the more you engage in a positive way this quantum effect. Do you have any opinion about that?
I buy into what you're saying. I buy into this, certainly this idea of entanglement, having come, as I said, from this corporate ecosystem. Accenture was an enormous organization within an enormous sea of corporations, and every bit was interconnected. And to a certain extent, I think our little Accenture Development Partner, our little benign growth within the system was able to scale. So it plays to what I was saying around the idea of intrapreneurship. Rather than leaving an organization, leaders might want to stay put and change the organization they're in, tap into that entanglement and harness the latent power of that entanglement to have a ripple effect throughout the organization, throughout maybe the universe, you might say, of change.
Right. Well, this has been such a wonderful conversation, Gib, with you. I'd like to, in the last few minutes, talk about your concept of a business decelerator. We've touched on the notion of people doing their own inner work, and you certainly kind of touched on that. But can you tell us about this, what you've created, this business decelerator?
And the juxtaposition is deliberate. There are lots of accelerators out there, and business has been going faster and faster and bigger. And I guess the impulse of the decelerator is actually just to challenge that notion, a bit like slow productivity. It seems counterproductive, but actually maybe the fastest way to drive change in ourselves, in our organizations, and in the world may start by actually slowing down and connecting to something deeper. And so this is what I'm trying to do. I've got some land on this, back to where we started the podcast, going full circle back to the island of Butte. I have land, and I'm developing a center there which will bring individuals from the for-profit sector together with the non-profit sector and expose them to the power of art and music and improv theater and community and nature. And
really by slowing down and coming off the hamster wheel and connecting, then I'm hoping that I will create the fertile soil for these new leaders, these new quantum leaders, you would call it, these new intrapreneurs, change makers to emerge. They're not going to do it sitting in London or New York or LA for that matter, 6 to 8 hours into their working week, head down, trying to be busy. I need to take them and expose them to something greater, connect them to different sectors and people that think differently, act differently. And my hope is that that might be the way that we will create these leaders that we so badly need to create this future that the world, I think, is crying out.
Yeah, I think that's a great model. In my own work, I talk about creating psychological space, because when you don't have that space, when you're jumping from one thing to another, you're always in the automatic pattern. And you want to pull yourself out of the busyness to give yourself a moment to allow new things to emerge, for creativity to emerge. So
you think about it in terms of the metaphor of music. We use music a lot in our work, and we talk about the space between the notes, which is what you're referring to in terms of maybe psychological space. But the space in a piece of music, the pauses, are every bit as important as the notes themselves. And so we need to punctuate our working lives with psychological space, with just space for being as well as doing. And my firm belief, and certainly I find it with my own work, the outputs will be exponentially greater. The impact will be exponentially greater from less busyness.
Beautiful, beautiful. And Gibb, do you have a website that people can go and find out more, or do you want to mention the name of your book again and where it's available?
Maybe if you've got show notes for this, you could put these things in. Amazon certainly has my book, The Intrapreneur, Confessions of a Corporate Insurgent. It's a business book disguised really as a story with goodies and baddies. And so it's not your usual charts kind of and graphs business book. So people can find that on Amazon under my name, and craigbulloch.org, www.craigbulloch.org is the business decelerator. And I'm on www.gibbulloch.com for some of the other work I do on inner work for leaders increasingly. How can we tap into that inner wisdom that is going to drive us in the direction we need to go in the future?
Great. Well, thank you very much, Gibb. This has been a very enjoyable and informative conversation, and all of that information will be in the show notes. So thank you again. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in with me on this Quantum Leadership podcast. I hope today's conversation has inspired you to think bigger, lead more authentically, and take steps toward meaningful change in your life and in your organizations. If you know leaders who might enjoy watching this, let them know about it, and please subscribe to our podcast. Thank you, everybody, and good leadership for all of you. Thank you, everybody, for joining me on this Quantum Leadership podcast. I hope today's conversation has inspired you to think bigger, lead more authentically, and take steps toward meaningful change. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share it with others, and make sure you subscribe and go to my website, drstephensideroff.com. Thank you again.